Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with some thoughts, year-end thoughts, I suppose, because this is the time that I do the Avoid Like Death Awards. And in celebration of the Avoid Like Death Awards, I always get a few comments from people who throw at me as if they think they're really smart doing this, like I haven't heard it a billion times, that stupid little Sibelius quotation to the effect that nobody ever built a monument to a critic, meaning, therefore, that whatever the critic says should be completely ignored and is completely worthless. So I'm going to have a little bit of a reply because, first of all, I'm kind of sick of seeing that silly little remark. And second of all, there's a little context that's probably worth considering. So let's get right to it, shall we? First, there is the hypocrisy of even sending me a comment such as that. Why? Because what are these people doing? They're criticizing the critic, obviously. And they obviously think that their criticism is valid and interesting and oh so smart, whereas mine is completely worthless because I happen to be a critic. So, screw them, right? I mean, it's just blatant, flagrant hypocrisy. I mean, if they can say that to me, why can't I say that about some recording? That's number one. Number two, the context in which Sibelius uttered that remark is actually rather interesting and I think important to understand, because he wasn't talking about critics vis-a-vis their audience. What he was talking about was he was giving advice to a fellow composer, saying to that composer, don't pay any attention to the critics, because if what you do is valuable, it will be recognized, whereas critics criticizing what you do is not going to make any difference. And Sibelius is right. He's absolutely right. I mean, you can't disagree with that in that context. I would say the same thing to a composer. I would say, who cares what the critics say? You have to be true to yourself. You have to be true to your art. Do your thing, and history will judge. But of course, critics are part of that history. And an important part of that history quite often as not. And we'll get to that in a moment. But so I don't disagree with what Sibelius said, actually, but it's silly to take that remark out of context and then try and just, poking at me, that's okay. I mean, that doesn't make any difference. But I mean, trying to use it as a way to validate yourself. Because that's what these people are doing. They're thinking that because Sibelius said it, therefore it means something. Well, I got news for you. What artists say is even stupider than what critics say. There's a news flash. Artists are good at art, making art. Sibelius, I would never gainsay him when it comes to, music, his own music. I mean, it was his own music. What he has to say about anything else on any other topic, irrelevant. Far less relevant than what I have to say about music, frankly, because I listened to more of it than he did. That's a fact. So anyway, there's that. Next, and here's a really sort of interesting sort of thing, I think, when you get right down to it. I don't know any critics who wanted to have monuments erected to them, but Sibelius is wrong. Lots of critics have monuments erected to them. One of the most famous was Edward Hanslick, the terror of Vienna, the author of an absolutely dreadful treatise called The Beautiful in Music, which was a 19th century landmark. He was viciously anti-Wagnerian. He hated Bruckner, and he wrote this anti-Wagnerian tract. He supported Brahms. Brahms actually thought that he really didn't know very much about music, but he took the support because it was politically sensible. But in the second half of the 19th century in Vienna, Edward Hanslick was the guy. And there's a monument to him. It's in the University of Vienna. Right there, there's a big bust of Hanslick. So yeah, Sibelius was wrong. And there are others. There are plenty of others. Literary critics, music critics. There's busts and monuments of all kinds of people for all kinds of reasons. And so it was a foolish remark on Sibelius's part. But the point he wanted to make, of course, was their opinion doesn't matter. Not literally that no monument has ever been erected, because either he didn't know or he didn't care, which just goes to prove what I just said, which was that we shouldn't pay attention to anything that composers say about anything other than their own music. most of the time, unless they're somehow qualified to opine on things outside their purview. So that was the other point that I thought was kind of fun. But let's talk for a minute about criticism, just for a bit. Critics are not writing for posterity, generally speaking. They are writing for their audience, the audience of their day. But criticism, the practice of criticism, it's as much an art form as composition is. It's literary, or in this case, it's audio-visual entertainment, one or the other. But, the fact of the matter is that 99.9% of critics are awful, just as 99.9% of composers are awful. And, Sibelius we care about because he turned out to be one of the geniuses. But if he'd been some schmo that no one ever heard of, if he had said that, then nobody would have cared. Nobody would have cared what his opinion is of anything, and nobody would have cared about his music either. He would have been in exactly the same position as me or any other critic. You're simply doing your job, and it's going to get recognized to the degree that it's recognized. If it is recognized, that means a certain number of people have found value in what you've done. If people really find value in what you've done, then perhaps it could even be elevated to the status of art, literary art, visual art. It's all the same, folks. I mean, really, one of the things that has always irritated me personally about this stuff is the fact that we build monuments to these people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I understand that in Finland, Sibelius is a major figure in Finnish culture. So they built a monument to him. Good for them, because he is a big fish in a small pond. I mean, and that's what they did. And that's great. I mean, this may have been even, I don't know whether Sibelius had monuments at the time he said this. But the fact that monuments are constructed says nothing about the quality of the work that people do. I would modify what Sibelius said and said, if someone has a monument built for them, chances are they suck. Because 9 times out of 10, the people doing the building have no clue about the actual value, the artistic or aesthetic value. They only understand the politics of it or the general culture of it. But the actual, the First Symphony is really great. I don't know if that ever enters into anybody's mind when they do these monuments. I mean, when Liszt was funding the Beethoven Monument, remember the Beethoven Monument Project, all this stuff. Germany was in the process of deifying its cultural icons because it had no political unity. So it created a national culture based on artistic products of the German lands. And Beethoven was the musical guy. So they built a Beethoven monument. It wasn't because Beethoven was just the greatest composer ever. It was because he was the symbol of German culture. And that's a very, very different thing. It's a very different thing. You don't have to be good to be a symbol of that. You really don't. You just have to be known or acknowledged or plugged or promoted or all of those things. And so I'm not too keen on monuments anyway. I don't know of any critics who did criticism because they wanted a monument. And so, I think we have to be a little bit careful about the way that we evaluate these things, evaluate the political versus the artistic or the aesthetic. Many bad people had many monuments built to them. When I was in Prague, I was in Prague just before the end of the Soviet Union and just after. And before, all of the wonderful monuments to Stalin and communism and Karl Marx and everywhere you turned. And then a year later, they were gone. Absolutely gone. You went to Prague and there was a guy. I remember the first time it was very, very strictly controlled. You had to, I took a train from Germany. You had to switch trains and they had to check your passport 100 times. And it was a whole ordeal. And there was, no currency exchange. It was I got there. There was a kid with a laptop with a stack of bills throwing them around, and tourists going there for beer because everyone knows the best beer in the world is in Czechoslovakia. Remember, they invented Pilsner. It was just wonderful. And you went there, and all the statues are gone. You said, what happened to Stalin? You know, it was like Stalin? Who's Stalin? What was that? Now, I'm not comparing monuments of composers to Stalin, of course. But again, it's a political act. I mean, these monuments, you know, they may be there, they may be gone. Tastes change, everything changes. So it's a fairly meaningless comment all by itself. And all I'm saying is that in any profession, I remember H.L. Mencken's fantastic remark. I mean, he said, all I want is simple competence in anything from adultery to zoology. That's what we want. That's what we try to do. We try to be as good as we can be. And the number of people in any profession who are really great is very small. The number of people who are going to be geniuses in whatever their profession is even smaller. And the ones that we value, hopefully, are the ones whose genius has some permanence. We don't know. The greatest opera composer in Mozart's day was Cimarosa. And look what happened to him. You know, he had a monument, no doubt, but look what happened to him. That's where we are, folks. And so when I get this comment, you know, first of all, because Sibelius said it's supposed to be valuable. Second of all, because it's supposed to put me in my place by saying that my opinions don't matter. And third, because it validates the always anonymous, cowardly jerk who thinks that they're doing something, you know, clever by sending me this stupid quotation. I just look at it and go, oh dear. That's part of the problem, not part of the solution, quite frankly. And that's how I feel about it. I value remarks like that. They're just so jejune. I love that word. It's jejune. Remember in Love and Death, Woody Allen's movie, you know, when he says to Diane Keaton, are you accusing me of jejunosity? Well, yes, there you go. I'm accusing them of jejunosity. It's just a silly thing to say, and it contributes nothing to the conversation because we're here to talk about music. The music we love, the music we want to share, the music that we can tell each other about. And, you know, my purview as a critic, as far as I'm concerned, is twofold. I think critics are, first and foremost, entertainers, just like composers are entertainers. That is, if you read criticism or watch criticism, it gives you pleasure. And giving somebody pleasure, I think, is the highest thing anybody could possibly do. That's what Haydn thought, and I'm totally behind him. He wrote a letter about it. And number two, we're educators. We're taking our fund of experience and sharing it and trying to encourage and invite others to participate in that same wonderful experience of this amazing art form called classical music or music more generally, and just reveal its many, many facets and create a community of people who enjoy doing that. And if I don't get a monument, great. This is my monument. And you who watch me, you are what make it all possible. And so as I come to the end of 2022, it's just another opportunity to thank you all and to hope that we continue for many, many years sharing this fantastic passion that we all have. And whether you agree or disagree or people like it or they don't like it, well, it doesn't make any difference. It's not about monuments. It's about the pleasure of listening. And that is what I'm trying to promote and give advice on and make suggestions about. And keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me on this endless ride. We're having such a good time. And to hell with what Sibelius and all those people have to say about criticism or anything else. It's all just bullshit. And we have better things to do. We have to keep on listening. So take care, and I'll see you later.